Before The Shield made him a household name to crime drama fans, Michael Jace was just a kid from New Jersey who stumbled into acting almost by accident. He built his career slowly, earned his place on one of television's most respected shows, and from the outside, seemed to have a quiet family life to match. Then, one evening in 2014, everything he had built came apart in a matter of minutes. His wife was dead, his children were inside the house, and he was standing in the doorway when police arrived. Long before Hollywood ever knew his name, Michael Jace was born Michael McLaurin in Paterson, New Jersey. Back then, acting wasn't even part of the plan. As a teenager growing up in Hackensack, sports were his world. Most days were spent on the basketball court or the baseball field, not on a stage or in front of a camera. Funny enough, his journey into acting happened almost by accident. While in college, he watched his girlfriend rehearsing for a play and figured it didn't look all that difficult. That little moment sparked something in him. What started as simple curiosity slowly turned into a real passion. Before long, he was studying acting at the Classic Stage Company in New York City, putting in the work and learning the craft. Eventually, that hard work paid off when he landed one of his first major roles, playing a Black Panther member in the 1994 classic Forrest Gump. That role opened the door, and little by little, more opportunities started coming his way. Then, in 2002, his career took its biggest leap when he was cast as Officer Julian Lowe on FX's new police drama, The Shield. Jace would go on to appear in 88 episodes across all 7 seasons, becoming one of the show's most recognizable faces. When The Shield ended, Jace stayed busy. Between 2009 and 2012, Jace kept building his resume, landing roles on shows like Burn Notice and Southland. Before long, his face was showing up all over television, with appearances in CSI, Private Practice, The Mentalist, and another stint on NYPD Blue. He also made his way onto the big screen in films like State of Play and Boogie Nights. To anyone looking from the outside, his career was moving in the right direction, and away from Hollywood, his personal life seemed fairly ordinary. Before marrying April, he had been married to Jennifer Bitterman. Their relationship ended with a separation in 1997 before the divorce became final in 2002. Not long afterward, he married April, a public school teacher, and together they appeared to be building a quiet family life. From the outside, that's exactly how neighbors saw them. A retired engineer named Chester Taylor, who lived across the street, remembered Jace as friendly and respectful. He often saw him walking the family's German Shepherd through the neighborhood. To Taylor, they looked like a normal couple living a peaceful life. Nothing about them suggested the tragedy that would eventually unfold. For more than a decade, Michael Jace built a career playing police officers. Viewers watched him wear the badge, uphold the law, and chase criminals across television screens. But in 2014, reality delivered a twist no scriptwriter could have imagined. The man who had spent years pretending to be an LAPD officer was suddenly standing in front of real LAPD officers with his hands cuffed behind his back. On the night of May 19, 2014, Michael Jace was arrested after his wife, April Jace, was shot and killed inside their Hyde Park home in Los Angeles. By the time police arrived around 8:30 p.m., the scene was already devastating. Inside the family's well-kept 3-bedroom house on Brenhurst Avenue, officers found 40-year-old April Jace lying in the hallway. She had suffered multiple gunshot wounds to her upper body. The veteran actor, dressed in a simple short-sleeved shirt, officers placed him in handcuffs. But what made the tragedy even more heartbreaking was who else was inside that home. 2 of the couple's young sons, both reportedly under the age of 10, were there when their mother was killed. A third son, who was believed to be a teenager, wasn't home at the time. Detectives later said the children almost certainly heard the gunshots. At the very least, they witnessed the chaos that followed. They lost their mother in an instant, and before the night was over, their father was sitting in a jail cell. After officers finished interviewing them, the boys were taken to a police station before being released into the care of California's Department of Children and Family Services. It was the kind of situation that leaves everybody asking the same question: how did things fall apart so quickly? According to investigators, April and her two youngest sons had only been home from baseball practice for about 15 minutes before the shooting happened. Neighbors later helped detectives piece together those final moments. Several people reported seeing Michael Jace pull into the driveway and walk into the house. One thing stood out almost immediately: the front door was left slightly open. Just minutes later, the quiet neighborhood was interrupted by several loud popping sounds. At first, one neighbor wasn't sure what they had heard, but after hearing more pops, they rushed back inside and called for help. Other neighbors told investigators they had heard the couple arguing only moments before the gunfire. When LAPD officers arrived, they found Jace standing in the doorway. Looking past him, officers could already see April's body lying in the hallway. They immediately took Jace into custody without incident. One question investigators couldn't immediately answer was why he was standing outside the home. Detectives weren't sure whether he had stepped outside because he panicked after the shooting, or whether he had been trying to leave the scene altogether. That answer would take time. Over the next several hours, detectives began collecting every piece of evidence they could find. Multiple 911 calls were reviewed, witnesses were interviewed, and investigators carefully worked to build a timeline of what had happened inside the house. During the search, police recovered a handgun from the home. It was sent to the crime lab for testing to determine whether it was the weapon used in the shooting. Paramedics also responded, but there was nothing they could do. April Jace was pronounced dead at the scene. As the investigation continued, the case quickly moved into the courtroom. Jace appeared before a judge and entered a plea of not guilty to the murder charge. At that point, detectives had not announced a specific motive. However, investigators acknowledged they were looking into several possibilities, including financial problems and ongoing issues within the marriage. Meanwhile, Jace's attorney stressed that the investigation was still in its early stages and said they would continue conducting their own review of the evidence. April Jace's family saw things very differently. To them, her death was a senseless act of domestic violence. Their attention wasn't on the legal battle ahead. Their focus was on the three boys who had suddenly lost their mother. During the arraignment, the court also issued a protective order preventing Jace from contacting his two youngest children except through his attorneys. At the time, he remained in custody on one count of murder with bail set at $2 million. As the investigation moved ahead, prosecutors strengthened the case. On August 15, 2014, they formally filed an information charging Michael Jace with the murder of April Jace. The filing also alleged that he personally used a firearm during the crime, causing the injuries that led to her death. Around the same time, preliminary autopsy findings confirmed that April died from multiple gunshot wounds. The Los Angeles County coroner officially ruled her death a homicide. If convicted, Jace was now facing one of the harshest penalties under California law, 50 years to life in state prison. Then came another important moment in the legal process. Jace's defense team made the decision to waive his right to a preliminary hearing. In simple terms, that meant they chose not to challenge whether prosecutors had enough evidence to move forward. Instead of fighting that early stage, both sides agreed to skip directly toward trial, where a jury would eventually hear the full case and decide Michael Jace's fate. 2 years after the killing of 40-year-old April Jace, the case finally reached trial. The headlines had faded, but inside the courtroom, prosecutors began laying out a timeline that painted a picture of a marriage that had been falling apart long before that deadly night. By then, the jury learned that Michael and April were raising two young sons together. Their boys were only 5 and 8 years old when their father shot and killed their mother on May 19, 2014. April also had an older son, Savoy, from a previous marriage, while Michael had an older son from his first marriage. April was the family's steady source of income, working in a university's financial aid office. Michael, on the other hand, had been unemployed for 6 years. According to testimony, the financial pressure had become impossible to ignore, and it was putting enormous strain on their relationship. One of the first witnesses to take the stand was Kenneth Brown, a close friend from church who had also worked with Jace on the Shield. Brown told jurors that Michael had been asking him for months to pray for his marriage. Behind closed doors, things were already falling apart. Brown also revealed something else that caught the jury's attention. Just weeks before the shooting, the two men attended church security training together. During that session, Brown learned there was a gun inside Jace's home, a revolver that had originally belonged to April's father. Then came the text messages. 5 days before the shooting, Jace sent Brown a message saying his marriage was a mess. It was short, but it said everything. By that point, the relationship was hanging by a thread. The courtroom then shifted to the day before the killing. On May 18th, April's adult nephew, Christopher, came over to visit. He and April went out to watch a movie before returning home, where Christopher spent the night. The next morning started with shouting. Christopher testified that he woke up to Michael yelling throughout the house. The argument centered on divorce, with Michael insisting there was no biblical reason for April to leave the marriage. The yelling continued for several minutes before the sound of objects crashing suddenly echoed through the house. Moments later, Savoy walked out of his bedroom carrying a baseball bat. Christopher followed him and immediately saw signs of the fight. A vase had been smashed and an ironing board had been knocked over. Michael and April were standing near the dining room table as the tension filled the room. Michael repeatedly tried to convince Savoy to hand over the bat, but the teenager refused and backed toward the kitchen. April asked Christopher to step in, and he eventually took the bat away from Savoy before the situation could get even worse. Throughout the confrontation, Michael kept insisting he would never physically hurt April. About 15 minutes later, shortly before 8 that morning, April left the house with Christopher, Savoy, and her 2 younger sons to take the boys to school. But even after leaving, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Concerned about Michael's emotional state, she reached out to Kenneth Brown and asked him to check on him. Brown tried to encourage his friend with a simple message about staying hopeful during difficult times. Michael's reply told a very different story. He admitted he believed it might already be too late. He said April wanted out of the marriage and that he was exhausted from trying to convince her to stay. Brown invited him over later that evening to watch a game, hoping it might take his mind off everything. Michael turned him down. Instead, he continued sending messages about the marriage, saying that if April was no longer the woman he believed she was, then everything had changed. He seemed convinced that the relationship was reaching its final chapter. As the day went on, Brown made one more attempt to get him out of the house. Again, Michael refused. This time, he admitted everything was falling apart so quickly that he wouldn't even be good company. When Brown asked whether he planned to stay home that night, Michael sent one final message saying he would be leaving that evening. At nearly the same time, another friend named Evan also invited Michael over. He never showed up. Instead, Michael spent almost the entire day texting April. The numbers alone were staggering. On the day she died, Michael sent April 95 text messages. Between the two of them, they exchanged a total of 164 messages over roughly 10 hours. Nearly every conversation circled back to the same thing: their marriage was ending. She told Michael she was afraid to come home because of his behavior earlier that morning. She mentioned the yelling, the broken objects, and the effect it had on their children. She also acknowledged that he was praying, but made it clear she no longer felt safe. Michael answered by saying he could leave the house for the night if that was what she wanted. But almost immediately, the conversation shifted back to blame. He accused April of failing to live up to his religious expectations and repeatedly asked what time she wanted him gone. April replied that she would return after their son's baseball game. Even then, the messages didn't stop. Michael accused her of abandoning both him and their children. He also accused her of being involved with another man, something she strongly denied. As the conversation dragged on, April finally pushed back, asking him to stop using the Bible against her. Despite everything happening between them, she still focused on their children. Later that afternoon, she pleaded with Michael to attend their son N's baseball game, explaining that the boy would be heartbroken if his father didn't show up. She even offered to stay away herself if it would make things easier. Michael replied that he was out walking, before adding that they both already knew they weren't going to talk that night. Hours later, April checked to see whether he was still on the road. He answered with a single word. Around 6:45 that evening, April apologized for not being the perfect Christian wife he believed he had married. Michael replied that he had been walking and drinking while trying to get into his friend Evan's house. Not long afterward, he admitted he had been drinking since sometime that morning, while also saying he had been praying throughout the day. Then came another message about the power of words. By a little after 8 that evening, April encouraged him to get some sleep and suggested they talk the following day instead. That became the last message she would ever send. She simply updated him about their son's baseball game and mentioned that it looked like he had enjoyed himself. Around that same time, Michael's cell phone briefly disappeared from the cellular network. When investigators later examined the phone records, they discovered that his phone wasn't near Evan's house as he had suggested. Instead, it was placing him near the family home during the critical minutes leading up to the shooting. Then came perhaps the hardest testimony of the entire trial. N, who was 10 years old by the time he testified, walked jurors through what happened after the family returned home from baseball. He said Michael was already standing in the dining room waiting for them. April sat down while one of the boys climbed into her lap. A few moments later, both boys went into their bedroom. From there, N looked out and saw his father pull his mother into the hallway by her arm. She fell to the floor. Then came words that no child should ever have to remember hearing. According to N, Michael told April that if she liked running, she should run to heaven. Seconds later, gunshots echoed through the house. April was shot in her legs and back. One bullet entered through the middle of her back before exiting through her chest. She died from multiple gunshot wounds. Only minutes after the shooting, Michael sent a text message to April's stepfather, Carlos. He told him to come get the boys because he had just shot April. Carlos and April's mother, Kay, immediately rushed toward the house while Carlos called 911 during the drive. He warned dispatchers about the message and explained that the couple had been arguing before the shooting. At 8:31 p.m., Michael called 911 himself. He reported the shooting but abruptly hung up. The dispatcher immediately called him back. This time, Michael admitted that he had shot his wife. He also repeatedly asked for paramedics, insisting that killing April had never been his intention. Following the dispatcher's instructions, he stepped outside and waited for officers to arrive. Just minutes later, LAPD officer reached the home. He found Michael standing in the doorway, still holding his cell phone. Michael immediately admitted he had fired a shot, but claimed he didn't know exactly what had happened. Inside the hallway, officers found April lying on the floor. Michael was arrested at the scene. The following day, detectives questioned him at the police station. Jurors later listened to the recorded interview. Although Michael admitted he had been drinking earlier, investigators testified that he didn't appear intoxicated during questioning. He told detectives that the text messages exchanged during his son's baseball game had pushed him over the edge. He believed they were finally recovering financially, but he also realized April had decided the marriage was over. According to his own statement, he was overwhelmed with emotional pain and wanted her to feel some of that same pain. Because April loved running, he admitted that he intentionally aimed for her legs. He also confessed that he originally planned to use the revolver to take his own life, but couldn't go through with it. Instead, his anger turned toward April. He admitted he never intended to kill her, only to wound her. According to his version of events, he was already holding the loaded revolver when April walked into the house with the boys. The children eventually left the room, leaving the couple alone. Michael claimed April suddenly moved toward him. He wasn't sure exactly what happened next or whether she had anything in her hands. Investigators later found no knife or weapon near her. He said he pushed her away. During that movement, the gun fired. After she fell, he fired again, saying he was aiming for her legs. He estimated firing 2 or 3 shots before everything was over. By this point in the trial, prosecutors had finished laying out their entire case. Now it was the defense's turn to make one last push before the case went to the jury. Jace's attorney immediately asked the judge to dismiss the murder charge under Section 1118.1. In simple terms, the defense argued that while Michael Jace admitted he shot April, prosecutors hadn't proven one critical point, that he had planned the killing ahead of time. Their position was straightforward. The shooting happened, but there wasn't enough evidence to show it was premeditated. The judge wasn't convinced. The motion was denied, meaning the trial would continue. But something else happened that caught everyone's attention. The judge openly questioned whether the jury should even be allowed to consider voluntary manslaughter. From the court's perspective, the evidence didn't really point to a crime committed in the heat of passion. In other words, the judge wasn't seeing the kind of sudden emotional explosion that normally supports that argument. Even with those doubts, the judge ultimately decided to give the jury the option anyway. That meant jurors could still consider the lesser charge if they believed the evidence supported it. The defense didn't spend much longer presenting its case. Michael Jace chose not to testify in his own defense, and with that decision, the defense rested. Now everything came down to 12 jurors. After hearing weeks of testimony, reviewing text messages, listening to 911 calls, and hearing from witnesses, they headed into the deliberation room. They didn't stay there very long. Roughly 2 hours later, the jury returned with its decision. 6 women and 6 men found Michael Jace guilty of second-degree murder. When sentencing day arrived, the judge handed down a punishment that ensured Michael Jace would spend decades behind bars. He received 15 years to life for the second-degree murder conviction. Then came the firearm enhancement. Because the jury found that he personally used the gun during the killing, the court added another 25 years to life. That sentence would run consecutively, meaning it wouldn't begin until after the first sentence. Altogether, Michael Jace was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison, a sentence that all but guaranteed he would spend the majority of the rest of his life behind bars.